if you've all seen The Martial Arts Master, then you've probably all seen our next guest. He is widely regarded as Bruce's most senior student. He doesn't like doing shows like this, and he had to be persuaded. Believe me, he had to be persuaded. The only other interview he's given in recent years is on The Martial Arts Master. So this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity for you people to talk to this gentleman, ask him as many questions as you want, listen to him very carefully because he has a lot to say. You'll hear the facts, you'll hear words of wisdom. There's not much more I can say to you about this man. He says it all himself. Please give a great British welcome to Mr. Taky Kimura. Okay, thank you very much. Was that a great British welcome? Can I hear a welcome for the gentleman on Taky Kimura's right? This is his son, Andrew Kimura. Thank you. Their first visit to England. Firstly, I'd like to go straight into this. Simply start by asking Taky a little bit, to give you a little bit of history about himself and a little bit of history about Bruce. Thank you.
Hello everybody. You've seen it all. You've seen all these fabulous demonstrations by different people who have come and addressed you people before, and here I come, a very humble man that doesn't do demonstrations. I just came to tell you a little story about how Bruce affected me. Bruce really turned the lives of many, many people that he met and many, many that he didn't meet. And I'd like to tell you a story about how he changed my life. Way back in the early 1900s, my mother and dad immigrated from Japan and came to the United States. And I was born as an American citizen in the state of Washington. And I grew up in a little small community where we were the only I think of a word here. We're the only minority family in this community, and my dad and mother had to work real hard to be accepted up there. And as we were, there was 8 of us kids who were born, and as we were brought into the community, why, since my mother and dad were pretty well accepted in the community, why, they accepted us pretty well. And to tell you the truth, I thought I was white as most of you people out there until I was about 16 years old. And during that course of time, my dad and mother used to always tell us that we were second-class citizens, that we were never going to be in the mainstream of life. So just you could be seen, but don't make any noises out there because you're going to hurt yourself. And we argued with him. We said, look, we're studying the Constitution in high school and grade school, and it's telling us that we're equal, just like everybody else. But lo and behold, the war came along, and then they put us into the concentration camp because they said that we couldn't be trusted. And this was something that was very devastating to me. As I said, I was hopeful and felt that I was equal to everybody up until that time, and then all of a sudden this came about, and all the things that my mother and dad had told me had come true. And when we were put into the camps, we tried to volunteer for the Army to prove our patriotism, but they said no. They said, you guys are a bunch of spies potentially, and so forth and so on, and we don't want you. We're going to put you in these camps, and at some point in time we're going to try to deport you in some island out in the South Pacific somewhere to get rid of you. And it was terrifying. We didn't know what to do. But lo and behold, over in Hawaii, where there was a very mixed population of minorities over there, the Japanese Americans over there were able to convince the United States government that they formed their own combat unit and go over and prove that they were patriotic, that they're loyal, that they could help defend the country, because this is the only country that we knew. And they went over to Europe, and they did some of the most amazing things in terms of valor and fighting skills, but in doing so they lost many of their people, and so within a year after we were put in the camps, after we were told that they didn't want us, they drafted us. And I had some close friends that objected, conscience objected, because they said that here you told us that you didn't want us, you put us in the camp, now you tried drafting us, but these people got put into the penitentiary, in the federal penitentiary, and after they got out, after the war, after we were taken out of the camps, they couldn't get a job anymore because they had a criminal record now. But these are the kind of things that happen to us, and I don't tell you these things because I'm bitter or anything like that. I tell my son, who's 22 years old now, that any time that you come up against something that is a very bad experience for you, you have to muster up enough courage and foresight to remember that there's something good that comes out of everything that you run into. But anyhow, getting back to the story, I came out of the camps a beaten man and tried to get a job. Nobody would hire me. I would try to get on a Greyhound bus. They would keep pushing me back. Sometimes I had to wait 2 or 3 buses to get on. I'd walk into a barber shop in the middle of the day. They'd tell me they were closed, and you'd walk into a restaurant and they would look at you, but they acted like you weren't there. They didn't say get out or anything. Sometimes I sat there for 3 hours before I got enough courage to be able to, I was so embarrassed that nobody was waiting on me that I just sat there, and finally, after about 3 hours, I get up enough courage to walk out. And these are the kind of things that happened to me that just drove me down to where I don't know what held me back from becoming a drunk and into drugs or whatever, like the American Indians over there. I mean, they've had all their things taken away from them, and they're just a beaten people over there. But anyhow, somehow I was able to muster up enough to get back online, and one of the things that happened to me was I started to take judo for a while because I felt that I needed to do something physically to kind of get myself back on line again, and after I'd done that for a while, back in 1959, one of my friends came to me and said that he met a young Chinese fellow down in Chinatown during one of the seafair pageants that they had that was put on a demonstration in something called Gung Fu. I said, my God, I said, what is that, some kind of a chop suey or what? And they said, no, they said, this fellow is only 18 years old, but he's one of the most fabulous guys that you ever met. And so I said, well, I've seen some of the best martial artists have come out of Japan, and I said, a guy 18 years old can't be anything like these other guys, but I thought, well, I have nothing to lose, so I got together with him. We met Bruce, and we met him in a ballpark. One of the universities over there have a ballpark there. We didn't have any place to go, so we met there, and one of the first things my friend said was, just do something to Bruce. Throw a punch at him or attack him or do something. And I was a little bit reluctant to do so because I was a little bit afraid of what I might get into, but I just pulled back and threw out a big punch, and he had me tied up like a pretzel in about 2 seconds, and I could feel those punches just coming at me just about 2 inches from my face, and then the wind itself was almost drastic enough to knock me out. And I became so impressed that I thought, well, gee, I got to get together with this guy. So I joined the club, and during that time we worked out in playfields and parks and different places like that, and we didn't have any money or anything, and we didn't have any place to work out, so we just worked out informally. And at that time Bruce was working in a Chinese restaurant. It was a family named the Chow family, and the lady in the house, her name was Ruby Chow, and she was sort of a self-elected spokeswoman for the Chinese community at the time, and she's a very outspoken woman, very successful in the restaurant business, and her husband was formerly a vaudeville actor who had worked for Bruce's father. Bruce's father was a very famous movie actor and vaudeville actor, and they used to have a troupe that came to the United States once a year, and while he was here one time, I think her husband met Ruby and they got married, but he owed Bruce's father some favors, so they said, well, when Bruce came over, they said, we'll sponsor him, we'll take care of him. And how Bruce came over was that he was born in Frisco during one of the vaudeville troupes that the family was doing every year, and so he was automatically an American citizen. But he was reared in Hong Kong, and I know that you people have probably heard and read about this. Bruce was a kind of a punk kid out back there. I mean, he was in fights all the time and these kind of things. And his dad was kind of worried about him. And when he was 18 years old, he got that letter from the President of the United States saying, greetings, either renounce your citizenship or make it active by becoming eligible for the military. And this was a good opportunity for his dad to get him off the streets, so he sent him over to the United States, and that's how he got in with Ruby Chow and her family. But Ruby was a very dominant personality, and Bruce himself was a very dominant personality, and he was quite spoiled, I think, at the time. I know he told me that when he was growing up in Hong Kong, that the family had servants, and he told me, he said, if I wanted to drink the water, he said, I'd holler in the middle of the night or something, so bring me some water, he said, and they did it, you know. And so anyhow, there was a little bit of a clash in personalities, and while we were working out, he was complaining about it all the time, and so we suggested that why don't we pay him a little bit of money and he can start a club, a school, and then that way he could get his own apartment somewhere and he could get out from under Ruby Chow. And so that's what he did, and we found a little spot down in Chinatown there, a little dungy little corner there that we set up shop in, and he began to teach us, and from then on in, after about prior to the school, of course, there was some group of people that had known Bruce before I did, and Bruce was teaching these guys before I met him, and one of the things that happened was that I think I was 38 at the time, and most of these kids were 18 to 25, and I was like an old man to the rest of them, and I was working twice as hard to try to keep up with the rest of them, and one day after quite a long time, I thought, boy, I must be getting a little bit better now, and I was feeling pretty confident, and all of a sudden, I looked at Bruce out of the corner of my eye, and I heard him say to somebody, he'll never make it. And that just drove me on to be even more, confident about trying to get to be better. And so, anyhow, those are the kind of things that kind of helped me to develop some confidence. And one of the things that Bruce told us that still stands out in my mind is, he said, listen, Taky, he said, you're just as good as me, no better, but he said, no worse. He said, I want you to remember that, he said that you have to have faith in yourself that you can do something, because he said if you limit yourself, he said, that's as far as you're going to go. And I have another example of a young man that was a good friend of mine that was 6'5". He played collegiate basketball, but he told me that he never stuffed the ball because he said he knew he couldn't do it. And that tells you that if you limit yourself, that's as far as you're going to go. And I know that we're not going to be able to fly to the moon, all of us, or anything like that, but outside of something that's not impractical, I think we have a long ways that we can achieve in whatever we want to do. One of the things like Bruce now, he was a young man when he was about 18 and I was 38. He was just a typical teenager, and I worked out with him, but I had to get away from him because he was kind of a perpetual motion person. He was always throwing punches in the air or throwing out kicks, and he was just a typical teenager. And as I say, when I worked out, I had to get away from him. But he could be telling you a real raunchy joke one minute, and then the next minute he could be spouting something that was Zennism or Taoism that just kind of blew your hat, And so I began to become more interested in him. I thought, gee, here's a man that's half my age. I'm old enough to be his father, but yet there's something I can learn from him. And so we developed a real good friendship. And after we started our school, he elected me to be his assistant, and so I helped him teach. And all the monies that we collected, I gave every penny of it to him. And even after he moved from Seattle down to Oakland, where he didn't have much money because he still didn't have a job or anything, every month I sent every penny that we made down there. And some of my friends told me that they thought I was crazy because I was doing all this work and not keeping a penny for myself. But I just felt that here's a man that came along and helped me to revive confidence in myself, to make me feel that I'm as good as anybody else, to make me feel that I should be able to reach the potential that I'm capable of. And so I felt that I owed him something. And Bruce did a lot of things for a lot of people. I want to give you one example. Was a young Filipino boy that was about 14 years old, and he came to me. Normally we didn't take young kids like that because it's a little bit more difficult to work with, with adults and younger kids. But in this case, I took this young boy, and one day after he was in class for a while, I took him up to the cemetery, and we both stood there in front of Bruce's grave and bowed and paid our respects. And I looked over at this young boy, and he had tears coming down his face, and he said to me, "Mr. Kimura," he said, "do you think," he said, "I could be buried right here next to Bruce?" And this is the kind of the kind of image that Bruce made on these young people like that. From your own country here, there was a man that came over just after Bruce died, and he told me that he was going to put flowers in Bruce's grave for the next 10 years. He said each month he ordered a florist to do that. And I said to him, I said, "Listen, John," I said, I don't mean to be rude or anything, but I said, what is this? How come you're doing this? He said, "I'm not even a martial artist," he said, but he said, and he told me a story that he had a family that perished in his house caught on fire, and his family perished, and he went into drinking and drugs, and one day he picked up a magazine in the gutter that was about Bruce Lee, and it changed his whole life. And so he came all the way from Great Britain, went over there, and he did this. So these are the kind of things that we're finding. Bruce still, it's almost 21 years since he's passed away, and he's still a great idol to many of these young people. And that's one of the reasons why I see all you people here. And it's unfortunate that you never got to meet him. I was very fortunate that I was one of the few that got to meet Bruce and got to know him as well as I did. And he was a guy that didn't look at race, even though he was a minority himself. He didn't look at race and say, "Well, I'm not going to take you because you're this or that or the other thing." In fact, he got into trouble with the Chinese community elders in Seattle as well as in Frisco because he was teaching outsiders. They didn't like that. They said, "They're going to beat up on us if you do that." Bruce said, "Listen," he said, "if they want to beat up on you, they're going to beat up on you anyhow." He said, "I teach anybody," he said, "if I feel that they have goodness in their heart." And so that's the kind of a guy Bruce was. But he was a typical human being just like the rest of us. I mean, he had a fiery temper, and I think that many of us can attest to the same thing. But Bruce was the kind of a guy that many people said he was kind of cocky, that he was overbearing and all that. But I have to take exception to that because I think it's like Muhammad Ali, he boasted and bragged about this and that and the other thing, but there was all kind of show, and underneath it all, they were both big-hearted people, and I know many times Bruce would talk to people, and he'd say, "Well, we do this," and they said, "Oh yes, we do that too." And one day he was talking to somebody, and they said they got into a little bit of a confrontation, and Bruce said, "Well, what would you do if," he said, "if I finger jabbed you?" I said, "I'd go like this." "No," he said, "well, what would you do?" He said, "If I kicked you in the groin." He said, "I'd go like this." So Bruce said, "Oh my God," he said, "you're too good for me," he said. He just broke it off. But that's the way he was. If you were interested, he would talk to you all night long. I mean, I remember on many occasions there was a judo man that was a good friend of mine that was very interested in the similarities and principle between the two martial arts, and we would go to his house. Every morning I'd have to get up at 6 o'clock and go to work, and here Bruce would drag me over to this guy's place, and 3 o'clock in the morning we'd still be talking about how that principle applied to football or whatever. I would sheepishly say, "Bruce, I got to get going. I got to get up pretty soon," But that's the way he was. Chuck Norris told us that when he met him at one of the tournaments, they happened to be going down the elevator at the same time, and they got to talking, and they stopped the elevator and got off on the 8th floor of this hotel, and he said they talked until 6 o'clock in the morning. If Bruce liked you couldn't stop him. He just kept talking to me because he just loved to hear people, that could relate to what he felt, what he thought about different things. And so this is the kind of a person that still, I think, holds a lot of idolship for all of us out there. And there's a lot of great athletes out there now that say, well, I don't want to be an idol to anybody, but when you're on the pedestal like that, you are an idol to people, and it's a shame because there are too many of them out there that aren't showing us the path of life that we should be going to. And so I think that the fact that you people are here today, and yesterday we had a nice group here, it just makes me feel real happy that Bruce is still remembered as somebody that revolutionized the martial arts. And I know that there's a little bit of fragmentation occurring out there now, and it makes me feel bad because I think the people that are self-imposing themselves as being Jeet Kune Do artists in the different parts of the world, many of them are not credited. They just kind of elected themselves to be that way, and sincere as they might be, I think it's unfortunate because pretty soon if they keep doing these kind of things, there's going to be a great fragmentation out there, and pretty soon they're going to be saying, well, Bruce Lee, who the hell was he? And I think we owe Bruce more than that. So at the present time, I'm working with Linda, and we're talking to Dan. Dan is the one that received the legacy of Jeet Kune Do from Bruce, and so he's the guy that has to formulate an organization who can get everybody together. And we don't want to point any fingers at anybody and say, well, here you are over there doing something, you're not even part of the deal or whatever. We just want to be inclusive rather than exclusive and bring everybody together and make people realize that if in fact you do respect and feel good about what Bruce did, well then I think that we need to put our ego aside and let's get behind Dan and do something that will be a core principle that Jeet Kune Do stands for, so that 100 years from now Bruce will still be remembered, you know, and given credit for the things that he's done for us. You know, his son Brandon, I didn't get a chance to know Brandon very well. When Bruce was, you see, he met Linda in Seattle, and her family was not too keen about her marrying Bruce. But anyhow, they got married. I was, with the ceremony, I was the only outsider there. Her mother and her grandmother and myself and Bruce and Linda were the only ones there. And after he got married, why, of course, he had Brandon, and since the family still lived in Seattle, he would come up maybe 2-3 times a year from California, and he would tell me, look, I'm coming up the 1st of July or whatever. He said, save 10 days, and I'm going to tell you what we're doing in the Jeet Kune Do aspect, so I can kind of keep you up on things. And he would teach me something, and then when he came back the next time, why, he was expecting me to be able to perform what he had taught me, and so I had worked very hard, and each time that he'd come back, I would say to myself, well, I'm going to show him this time. I don't think he can stop me from what I'm doing. But each time he would treat me like I was a little kid and just put me right down. And this is how good he was. I mean, it's just very difficult to compare. You know, after he's gone, many people say, well, yeah, Bruce, he was a little guy. He wasn't that good. But he had something that many people don't have. And he had a lot of that instinct that many people don't have. I mean, instinct is something that you can develop to a certain extent, but it has to be inherent, I think, to the most degree. And Bruce was a guy that had grown up in the streets, and he had been in a lot of street fights and these kind of things, and he knew what the real battle was. He told us many times that swimming on water is much different than swimming in the water. And he said at some point in time, he said, you've got to get into the water and swim in the water, and which meant that any of us that are in the martial arts, at some point in time, to measure your own ability and to be able to really do it under pressure, you have to get out there and spar with somebody. Although many times there are people out there that don't want to get in and do something like that. So if you're that kind of a person, there's still an outlet for you, because when you get up to a certain plateau of life where your physical dimension no longer will carry you, that's when the mental attitude kicks in, and that becomes the dominant factor that's going to take you to the rest of your life until they nail that last nail in your coffin. You're going to keep learning. So that's one of the interesting things about martial arts, as opposed to boxing, where boxing is, and I don't mean to put anything down in boxing, but I think it's more of a physical skill. That's why you you find a guy that's around in his early 30s in boxing, and he's pretty much over the hill because there are young guys coming up that have much more physicalness that they're going to beat you. But in the martial arts, with this philosophy of Zenism and Taoism, you keep growing, and you find out that the dominance of the mental attitude is much more important than the physicalness. And, you've seen people that like they play racquetball or something like that. I have many friends that are in their 60s that play these young kids that are in their 20s, early 20s, and they beat their pants off because they know how to make these guys move, and they know just exactly how to make every move count for themselves. One of the things that about Brandon, as I was saying, when Bruce used to come back to Seattle, Brandon was still under 3 years of age, but Bruce was very proud. He'd have me have Brandon do a kick, side kick or something like that, or the punches, and he was very, very proud that Brandon was really showing some potential there. And the last time that I saw Brandon was after his death. Linda had moved back to Seattle for a short time, and then she moved back to California, and then she came back again, and at that time those of us in my club were honored to be able to have dinner with her, and so we sat around a big table, and Brandon sat right opposite my son here, and he was about 16 at the time, and Andy was about 9, and Brandon was kicking him under the table all through the meal there. That's the impression that Andy had of Brandon, and so he was very anxious to be able to, rekindle that short acquaintance, but unfortunately it wasn't to be. But Brandon himself was a young man that didn't want to climb up on the shirt tail of his dad. He wanted to make it on his own. He didn't want to have his dad's influence open the doors for him. And he was very adamant about that. And even at first, he didn't take Jeet Kune Do. He took martial art lessons from some other stylist, and that kind of frustrated me for a while. But then he got in with Dan Inosanto, and one of the things about Brandon was, even though he was Bruce's son, he didn't go to Dan Inosanto and say, look, I'm Bruce's son, I want you to give me private lessons or start me at the top. He started at the very bottom, and very emotionally, Dan told me sometime after his death, he said that Brandon was showing a lot of improvement. He said I was so happy because he said he was becoming a tremendous martial artist. And he said one day, he said, I wanted him to take over the legacy of his dad, Jeet Kune Do, but again, that wasn't to be. But after he started taking lessons from Dan, an intruder broke into his house, and he took care of that pretty well. I just heard that from my son. I'm going to let you have him tell you what happened there.
One of my father's students moved to California after he finished studying. My father sent him down to finish up his education in martial arts with Dan Inosanto. He befriended Brandon, or rather Brandon befriended him, and he told me the story that Brandon came home one night and found an intruder in the house, and he said it was kind of like a Three Stooges episode. He chased him around the house in circles until one point the guy stopped and picked up a knife, and whereupon Brandon disarmed him, and then I think he broke his arm and beat him up a little bit and waited until the police came and held him there. So he was quite excited about, it all coming together, as I'm sure some of you martial artists know, when you don't think about something and it just happens. It's quite an exciting time to know that all the time you've spent training is really paid off, especially when it's that kind of a life and death situation.
I'd like to tell you, when Bruce died and his body was brought back to Seattle, and we had a second funeral service, and at this service, it was a very unique service. They had no preacher or anything. They just had several records, songs that Bruce liked. One was Impossible Dream, and I think you're probably aware of some of the others. And they had no speakers. Actually, I was thought of as being Bruce's closest friend, so they let me have the main eulogy there, and then they had a fellow, Ted Ashley, who was the chairman of the board of Warner Brothers, that gave a little talk, and one of the things that he said was, he said Bruce rapidly rose to the pinnacle of stardom, and he said many people, he said, in this acting profession, he said, cannot handle themselves because of such pressure, but he said Bruce was one guy that really was able to contain himself and handle it very well. And during that service, why Steve McQueen, who was a student of Bruce's, James Coburn came up, Jim Kelly was there, and I was honored to be able to meet Steve McQueen and James Coburn, and got to talk to them briefly while they were there. James Coburn, and this is another story I'm sure you're familiar with, but James Coburn was telling me that when he was learning from Bruce, why he had a great big bag in his backyard, and Bruce went out there and looked at that bag and, oh, he said, it's kind of hard, isn't it? He hit that thing and cracked it open, and he said there was feathers all over the yard, he said, you know, and he was just telling how much power that Bruce had. And there was another story where Bruce was hired on as a technical director for a movie that was being filmed down south, and they had a couple of redneck stuntmen on there, and they were great big guys, about 6'4", 6'5", and they just refused to take orders from Bruce. They said, hey, that little Chinaman's not going to tell me us what to do. And so the director had to do something, so he said, listen, you guys, he said, I just want you to come down to the pool side there. I want to show you, you know, something about what Bruce is about. And so Bruce said, well, he had a big shield, and he told this one guy, he said, now, he said, hold that shield, because he said, I'm going to kick you, he said, but he said, I want you to stand by that pool, and I get set now. And so he kicked this one guy, and he kicked him about halfway across the pool, and the other guy said, well, he said, that had to be an accident. He said, you can see if you can do that to me. And so he kicked him halfway across the pool, and he said that he didn't have any more trouble by giving orders after that. But Bruce was a phenomenal person. I mean, I've been with him on many demonstrations, and most of the time when we'd give a demonstration, there was always some big 6'4" guy or something like that. There was a doubter that looked at 5'7", slender-looking Bruce Lee, and said to himself, geez, who's that guy there, you know? And every once in a while, they'd say it out loud, and Bruce would hear that, you know, and then we'd get the demonstration going. He said, now, he said, I need a volunteer, and he'd remember that guy. He said, would you come up here, sir? He had this famous 1-inch punch, and he would put a chair behind this guy, about 4 foot behind the guy, or maybe about 3 feet, and he would just, it was an extended punch art, and if you can visualize that your hand is extended like that, there's no punching power except pushing, really. But if you are able to manifest the most coordinated effort in this stance like that, with a cock twist like that, you can make a very penetrating force, and just not hit thud like an iron bar against your stomach, but it penetrates through you. And he would hit this guy, and he would take a somersault. He'd hit that chair, and he would land up against the wall, and he'd be just holding himself because he was just really in pain. And that's the kind of power that he generated. You know, you just wonder where power like that's coming from, a fellow that's that small. You know, if you take well, the two bodyguards were here, big as that. If somebody that size did something like, you'd say, well, yeah, but look at the size. You know, look, you know he's got power. But many people of that stature don't really utilize their full strength because they're just using their arms, and they can still get away with it. But for a smaller person, you have to be able to locate the center point of your body. You have to be able to coordinate to that to the nth degree between the tip of your toes and the end of your fingers. And that's something that doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of experience and time to be able to develop that. But these are the kind of things that Bruce did. When he held his arms out like that, it was just like touching a baseball bat. And if he came down with a blow like this just to block you, it almost broke your arm. I mean, that's how devastating it was. And it was just really an honor to be close to him and do the kind of things that he did. Many demonstrations that he did, he would hook up a high kick, and it just tipped my ear like that. And I never had any problem of getting nervous or anything. He took the nunchuck and just whisked them past my hair and my head, and just things like that I never had any problem with him. I knew he was never going to miss, but except one time he was teaching the group, and I was standing like here, and he was standing here, and the group was over there, and he was looking at him. He said, one of the things he told us, when you punch, he said, don't punch and let your punch culminate here, but he said go all the way through his head. And he was looking over there, and he went, ow, like that. And I was wearing glasses, and he hit me in the eye, my right eye, splintered glass all through my eye. They had to haul me to the hospital immediately, and I was bleeding like everything. And the doctor admonished me for saying, you ought to be stupid. You're stupid. He said, we're doing something as dangerous as that without a mask on. And Bruce scolded me. He said, you moved, he said. And I didn't think I moved, but I wasn't going to tell him I didn't move. I said, well, I guess I did. and there was times like we'd go down to a tournament down in Long Beach. Ed Parker, who was to be noted for being the pioneer of introducing martial arts in this country. And when he met Bruce, he was so impressed with Bruce that at his Long Beach tournaments every year, the international tournaments he had one, he would invite Bruce down to put a demonstration on. And of course, Bruce said, I want to bring Taky with me. And of course, Ed Parker didn't want to pay my way down, but he had to do it. So I got a free ride down there and beat up at the same time, but it was okay. It was pretty good. But we'd put these demonstrations on, and during one of the demonstrations, we were in the hotel room, and we were kind of rehearsing what he was going to do. And you know, he said, okay, he said, try to hit me. And of course, you know, you have to be Asian to realize this, but there's such a feeling of respect for elders and for people of higher stations and that kind of, like, for instance, he was my teacher, even though he's half my age. I had that utmost of respect for him, that relationship, and so I couldn't get it in my head to even try to punch him, even though I thought that I might be able to do it. I just couldn't do it. And he knew that I wasn't putting out what I had, and it made him angry. So he said, throw the punch, and I would just kind of half-heartedly throw in the punch. And he got mad, and he slapped me in the face, and I just flared up all of a sudden myself, you know, and I didn't realize I threw a punch at him, and he went backwards, and there was a big stool right behind him. He fell over the stool, and I thought, oh my God, this is the end of my life right there. But all of a sudden he got up and he turned into a big smile. He said, that's what I want you to do. That's what I meant, he said. And so those are the kind of things I think that we have to let our instincts carry us many times when we're practicing them, but just let it happen. Outside of that, I guess I've bored you enough, so if you have any questions or anything, maybe I can answer a few. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Taky. Just like to let you guys know, if you weren't already aware, that the guy you're looking at is 70 years of age, and that in itself just deserves a round of applause. Just like to direct the next question to son Andrew, because I know he's a bit biased, but I'd just like to get Andrew, just like to get your opinions on your dad and how your dad has influenced you and how that influence you may have come from Bruce. Can you just tell us a bit about that?
Well, as you can probably see, he's a wise man. He's a wonderful man. I wouldn't rather have anyone else in the world as my father, my best friend, and my teacher. I think that I wouldn't be here, the person I am, and my father certainly would be the person he was if he hadn't been Bruce. So I feel indebted to Bruce and his entire family, of course. I love martial arts, and, you know, I'm really happy to be here, and that's about all I got.
Okay, this is certainly you guys have paid your money to come here, and you've got this great, humble-looking guy, as he describes himself. Have you got any questions you'd like to ask Taky Kimura? Please.
What different martial styles did Bruce allow to influence the makeup of Jeet Kune?
Oh, you know, when Bruce came over here, he was familiar with many styles. The northern style, the southern styles, Hungar, Charlie Futt, and many others like that. But I think he fell in love with Wing Chun because at that time he felt it was the most direct, precise method of fighting, even though Wing Chun was comprised, I think, predominantly of hand techniques. You know, the kicks were mostly below the belt, but Bruce felt it was the most straight line between 2 points, that type of principle, and so he patterned it off of that. But I think partly too, his dad was a very close friend of Yip Man, and that's one of the things that his dad was trying to do, was trying to get Bruce on the right track, and so he had Yip Man start teaching him. But one of the things that Bruce, having known all these different martial arts, I think he was pretty perceptive about what was really practical and what wasn't. And so immediately, even at that young stage, he began to streamline and modify what he felt was good and what wasn't good. You know, he just eradicated what wasn't good. And so Wing Chun at that time, being a straightforward thing, the trapping techniques and all that, became something at that point that he felt was really the most practical thing. But you know, one of the things is, in the Asian countries, most of the people, of course it's different today because the Asians have grown to quite higher statures, but most of the people were around my size, and Bruce was just a little bit taller than me. I mean, so when you're dealing with people your own size, it sort of equalizes the field. But when he came over here and found out that he's going up against guys as big as you guys are, why he felt that a lot of these tactics didn't work any longer. And he had a very keen, perceptive mind. He could look at something and just in a split second he could tell you what was going to work and what wasn't. And another thing was I had Jun Rhee. I don't know if you've heard of Jun Rhee or not, but he's one of the guys that pioneered the Taekwondo in the United States. And Jun Rhee told me personally, he said, I showed him some of the Taekwondo kicks that we have, he said, and he said the next time I saw Bruce, he said he was doing it better than I could have after I'd been doing it for 15 or 20 years. So this is the kind of a guy Bruce was. I mean, if you showed him something, I think when you talk about nunchucks, I think he picked that up largely from Dan Inosanto. But I think Andy can tell you, Dan told him, didn't he tell you that, yeah?
Yeah, Dan told me a story that basically that you hear the same thing from lots of different people, that he showed him the nunchucks, and the next time he saw him, he was doing it better than he was, and so it was.
Thanks for the question. Anybody else got a question? Yeah.
You just said that the Taekwondo guy was sort of some of the high kicks, but where did most of the spin and high kicks in the front? When I read somewhere, it's a lot to do with Chuck Norris on the wall. Can you just stand up and speak a bit louder? Yes. Okay. Yeah, most of the high kicks used to come from the Taekwondo guy, but the spinning kicks and a lot more of the high kicks, did they come from Bob Wall, Chuck Norris, or? I mean, it's not really part of the Wing Chun.
Well, no, I wouldn't say it came from those people precisely. Even when he was there, he was in Seattle in 1959 and thereabouts. He could do those high kicks. It was almost like acrobatic proportions. But as I say, he was more strongly into the Wing Chun concept. So he didn't advocate that we use those. But the kind of kicks that you've seen in the movies that he's done. I think we have to recognize that most of those were exhibitional type things that normally he probably wouldn't resort to in a real street fight because obviously any time that you make those big motions like that, you're a little bit more vulnerable to attack. But Bruce was the kind of a guy that had that blinding speed. His arches were like this. It was you just see his toes and your heel. That's all you could see when he walked out of the shower. I mean, and I think that's one of the reasons that he had that blinding speed. He would do things like, stand up there, Andy. I don't do any demonstrations, so this is, but he would say, okay, he said, I'm gonna tap you in the face. He said, just don't let me do it. He said, well, you'll never stop me here. So he'd go back like this, and he would say, okay, are you ready? And he would leap in, and he would tap you in the face, and he would be back about that distance before he was going like this. And we used to give demonstrations. We used to give demonstrations at these fraternities. We moved our club to the university district where the big university was, and we were hopefully we could get a bunch of these young college kids, and so we give these demonstrations at these fraternities, and and there'd all be these big athletic jocks, football, basketball, baseball, be in there, and they were, you know, the campus heroes, and so he'd say, well, who's fast here? And they'd say, this guy, he'd be one of the star football players or something, and Bruce would pick him out and perform this demonstration, just 2 or 3 different things like that, and he used to just put these guys down to where they were about 2 feet tall by the time he got done with them, and he had certain things that he did. I mean, there's a thing that he does. Let me show you that again. This is just to demonstrate the kind of power that he had. You'd hold your hands out straight and without bending your elbow and just pull a guy down like that. This means that energy for a guy his size has to be coming just in the utmost of coordination from the center of your body to the tip of your toes out your hands, and you're not just your shoulder, you're using your whole body. And I've never seen anybody beat him. I've seen many big guys that would just stand there and say, do that again, I wasn't quite ready. And he'd do it about 3 times. They got the message. They couldn't beat him, but they just destroyed him, you know. So this is the kind of a guy Bruce was. I wish that you could have met him, because you would have really been impressed with him.
I'd just like to ask you, Taky, what's your favorite Bruce Lee film and why?
Well, personally, I like that Return of the Dragon real well, because was that the name of the one that Chuck Norris, he had that famous battle up there. That was a classic battle that they had up there, and you know, Chuck Norris, I met Chuck Norris about a short time after Bruce's death. There was a young man in Hawaii that had a tabloid magazine, and he was pushing a lot of the things like the Ninja Turtles. That's before that time, but that kind of thing. And he was doing all kinds of athletic things. And he came to Seattle, and he talked to Linda and myself, and he said, gee, I'd like to put on a big exhibition in this big center in Hawaii in commemoration of Bruce. And so we all went over there, and Chuck Norris and Bob Wall, we all rode in the same plane and went over there. And I got to know Chuck Norris, a real nice fellow. But those guys will tell you that how great Bruce was, and you know, they're in a position where right now they could say, oh yeah, he was great, but he was just a little guy. But even Joe Louis, at first he said that. He said Bruce was in a talk show one night I was tuned into, and he said, oh yeah, Bruce was a little guy. He was a great little guy, but he wouldn't measure up against us big guys. But now, as you can see, Joe Louis is professing to teach Jeet Kune Do methods, and so I think that tells you something there too. But one of the things that we have to do is to get this thing back in line so that it doesn't get distorted to where, you know, it's forgotten. And I think those of you that are martial artists in here, we need your understanding and support that it should be handled in a way that there's no danger of Bruce's life being, you know, image being forgotten in the next 20 or 30 years.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody in the audience have any questions? Yeah, please.
In the film Dragon, he has a fight with an opponent from the Chinese community, and he's about to walk out of the place where they were, and then his opponent attacked him and he went down. And then he was in a wheelchair for a while. Was the film true to life? Did that really happen?
Yeah, no. Bruce was a guy that could do phenomenal things, even though he was small. He could take a barbell at 115 pounds. He could hold it straight out like that. He had some students that he was teaching at the time that this one guy was a former Mr. United States in bodybuilding. He couldn't even do it. But what he was doing was he was practicing with a weight on the back of his head, and he was doing his deep waist bends, you know, and he hadn't warmed up, and that's how he threw his back up. But in the movie they portrayed it that he got hurt in that fight, and that was so far from the truth. Now, let me tell you a little bit about that film. When they were going to make that film, this director, what was her name? Yeah, Rafael De Laurento, she was, I think, the producer of the movie, and and she called me, and she wanted me to help her to try to do something so they could put that Seattle chapter into the movie. And I told them, I said, look, I said, you need to see Ruby Chow, because I said, even though there was a little bit of friction between Ruby and Bruce, I said, still, I mean, they were the people that sponsored him, and they're both Chinese, and I think that needs to be brought in there. And so they sent a spokesperson up here, and when they went to see Ruby Chow, from what I understand, Ruby Chow wanted to have a certain influence over just exactly how the story in Seattle was going to be told and all that. And then, you know, in any movie there's such a thing that they call dramatic license, that you have to kind of spice it up, and they couldn't come to, you know, to terms with him, so they had to drop that. The other part that they were going to use was that in the film with the university students are in this weightlifting room, and Bruce is in there, they try to get him out there, and he beats him up. And see, that was supposed to have happened at the University of Washington Athletic Club, but when this spokesperson went to the university and talked to the people, they said, well, this was a year after the University of Washington had won the national championship in football, and they said nobody beats up on our football players. Besides, it's just not a good image, and so they turned them down. And so they just said, the heck with it, we're not even going to put Seattle in there. So if you recall in that movie, 1962, Boomer was already down in Oakland or somewhere, and so that's how that happened. But when I first saw that movie, I was a little bit frustrated. It angered me, because this, you know, having known Bruce so well, this guy didn't look anything like Bruce. He didn't move like him, and it was almost like an affront to me. But I had to get over that, because I knew that the movie was showing the supportiveness that Linda had been to him for a long time. And, you know, Linda was probably more Chinese than a Chinese person could be in terms of, you know, being a wife to Bruce. And she was an unsung heroine behind the lines that won a lot of battles for him behind the scenes that nobody knows about. When he had problems with the directors on the set or anything else like that, she always sort of polished it over and kind of smoothed it over, and she never got credit for that. So when this movie came out and it showed, you know, that the element of giving her that kind of credit, it really made me feel good. So I was able to shift gears and say, wait a minute, this show is in tribute to Bruce and Linda. I got to get that out of my head. And so when I looked at it from that, it was a rather romantic, you know, good movie, I thought.
Thank you. Gentleman back there, got a question.
Is Taky still taught in small classes, very individually like it was, or is it now taught more in bigger classes like karate and other martial arts?
You know, I don't know exactly how to answer it, except that I do know that, as I said, when I used the word fragmentation, there's some of that occurring out there. There's people in the different parts of the world saying that they're teaching Jeet Kune Do, and I think that in those circles like that, there are some smaller groups, I'm sure, along with larger groups. But the point is, I like to illustrate it like a sculpture. If you have a big block of clay and you're going to try to make a handsome figure of somebody there, you have to chip away and throw all the non-essential parts of it away. But in doing so, when you finally arrive at that fine art object at the end, you look at that art object and say, that's it, and you forget about the parts of it that you threw off that made that final thing that you arrived at. And so, you know, Bruce one day he called me from down California, and he said, you know, he used to pride himself in the importance of sticking hand. And he called me and he said, sticking hand, he said, that's not the ultimate anymore. I said, what do you mean, Bruce? And he said, well, he said, I'm working with this Kareem Jabbar. He said, he's 7'2". He said, I'm looking right at his navel. And he said, I can throw a kick out. He said, he can still block me because his arms are longer than my legs are. You know, when he was in Seattle, he used to always say, well, one of the things when we gave demonstration and things like that, he said, look at it, he said, your legs are longer than your arms. You can pretty much always throw your leg out there and keep a guy from hitting you, which is true in most cases. But when you get a guy that's 7'2" and you're 5'7", it doesn't work anymore. And although he was able to you know, to bounce Kareem Jabbar around the room, it became exceedingly more difficult for him because it's like anything else. Once that you have a certain size advantage over somebody, and you get some of the rudiments of basics, once you get some of the basics, you can take a guy that is maybe, let's use the grade levels in judo, for instance. You get a guy that's black belt in judo, say, and he's about second degree black belt, which makes him pretty good, but any one of you guys sitting in the front row here, you're pretty good sized people then. Once that you're taught some of the basics, after maybe even a couple of months, and you learn the formation of where your balance should be and how your hand should be and that kind of thing, you're going to be able to hold your own against a lot of guys that are first and second degree black, but they're not going to be able to throw you. But when you get into about the third degree, then technique becomes a much more accomplishment for those kind of people. Then they can throw you all over the place like you're a rag doll. But this is where size becomes a technique in itself. Years ago they used to say, well, judo is a little man's tool because the little man always has more coordination than the big man. But you know, that's not true anymore. They have all these advanced techniques where you're doing all these weight training and things like that, that these guys that are 7 foot are running down the court faster than guys as little as us could do, you know, or even think of doing it. And so it's grown to be a big man's world now, really. But the only advantage, I think, would be in a battlefield. It might be harder to shoot than some of you big guys, but other than that, the big man is really there now.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got a question.
You said that Bruce Lee used to fight a lot in Hong Kong. Did he ever teach you how to deal with things like fear, anxiety, pain, that sort of thing? Did he ever teach you to deal with emotions?
Well, I think a lot of that is sort of an innate characteristic. I mean, you know, there are many of us that are very passive people that let me use a lady as an example. I mean, if you teach martial art to a lady, oftentimes they'll say, well, I could never finger jab him, I just couldn't do it, you know. Well, with that kind of mentality, you could be in the martial arts for 15 or 20 years and you still wouldn't be able to do it because it's just not part of you. And so in order to answer that question properly, I think that Bruce was the kind of a guy that had that instinct, that streetwiseness that made him different from many other people, you know. When you talk about instinct, I mean, let me tell you a little story about instinct. You know, I used to go to the ball games all the time, and one day I took this young kid that was about 14 years old to the ball game, and we were sitting up in the grandstand about 15 or 20 seats down from the field level there, and all of a sudden a foul ball was hit into this place 15 or 20 feet below where this young friend of mine was sitting, and this kid raced down those 14 or 15 stairs and got that ball before those guys were sitting right there. And that's what you call instinct. I mean, he knew exactly when to move, and the rest of them were just kind of hesitating, and that's what destroys you, you know. But one of the things that when I talk about the mental aspect, that's a thing that kind of puts you into it. As he indicated, I'm 70 years old. I'm not a fighter. I mean, I would never tell you that I was a fighter. I'm this or that. I've never ever done that because I have to be honest with myself. But I do know that Bruce taught me something that I would never have accomplished in my life if it hadn't been for him. I've done things in my life that I think is extraordinary. If I told you anything, you'd probably say, well, that's nothing. But to me, it's been an accomplishment that I would never have achieved after having gone through the camps and been destroyed like that. And he restored that in me. So if you have those kind of things that you can, I mean, you know, they say that people have to be born with all this, but that's not completely true either. I think you can develop those things within yourself. But let's face it, Bruce is just like the rest of us. He had the same fears and hates and loves just like anybody else.
Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Did you do a lot of cheek sounds sticking hands with Bruce?
Yeah, he taught us, you know, quite a bit of that. But at that stage of his teaching, he was more into the classical elements of what Wing Chun, you know, really is. And so we were taught that Wing Chun, sticking hand, was really an important part of, and I think still today, if you go to any Wing Chun, master that you learn, why, they're going to give you a lot of sticking hand, because there are 4 ranges. You look at the long range, the medium range, the contact range, and your grappling range. And when you make contact, that's when the sticking hand concept comes in, with your blocks and all these different things that you do.
Thank you. Just like to ask you, Taky, about one or two of the things that Bruce left you, not as a legacy in terms of possessions. I know you brought something with you today that you'd like to show the fans. Is there anything else that you might have?
Yeah, I bought this book that the first book that he wrote, and he addressed something to me. And the reason that he did that was, after Bruce became very famous and was in Hong Kong, and he was being constantly bombarded with. He told me that people would put a check for $1 million just written out to him under his door, and he knew he couldn't cash it because he knew that if he had it, that he'd be in somebody's pocket owing him something. And so he had to clear things through his attorney most of the time. He was so fearful, and he couldn't go out anywhere without people just mobbing him for autographs and all that. And I think at that time he began to realize, as any of us in this room will have to attest, if you look at you, examine yourself, you know that amongst all the friends you have, there's only 2 or 3 guys in that group that you can really depend on when you need them. The rest of them are going to say, well, gee, I'm sorry, Jim, I feel badly, but I wish I could help you, but they're not going to be behind you, And I think at this point, Bruce realized that he only had a handful of real friends that he could depend on. And I say this very humbly, but all the time that I was learning from Bruce, I never once asked him or pressured him to teach me something more, because I knew that when he felt that I was ready for the next thing, he would give it to me without me asking him. And people have asked me, well, do you think he held back from you? And I don't think he held anything back from me, but the only reason I didn't learn any more than I did was because I'm one of these guys that has 2 left feet, and I have to analyze everything in my mind before I can do it. And Bruce is one of the guys that he really didn't like to teach beginners, because he knew that he had to tell you 15 times before you got it, and he didn't have that kind of patience at the beginning. But if Bruce were alive today, people say, well, what do you think he'd be doing? I mean, this guy that was Mr. Invincible, how do you think he'd be able to put up with things? But I think that Bruce had that wisdom and that ability to make that shift in gears, as you might say, and would be a little bit more of a philosopher, a little bit more of a patient teacher. I think these are the things that people often wonder. I mean, he'd be in his 50s now. I mean, he wouldn't have the physicalness. I mean, what would he be doing? But I just feel that if he was here today, that he would be writing books and doing a lot of the things in the mental plateau that we have to reach into when we get to be that age.
Thank you. Yeah, question, please.
Just one more. If Bruce Lee was alive today, what do you think he would feel about the way that martial arts is taught in the West, and philosophy is more money and physical side rather than the spiritual side? What do you think he would do?
Well, that's an interesting question. Bruce and I were going to start a national string of schools to begin with, and I don't know if you people sure have heard of James Lee. He was the student that he developed in Oakland there, and James actually came up to Seattle and spent a couple of months there, and we all worked out together trying to pattern ourselves on how we were going to do this. But when Bruce found out that there was a lot of the commercial aspect in the martial arts was taking place, people were interested. They knew there was big bucks in it. They were interested in signing you up with a contract that said you got to pay me for the next 6 years or whatever. And many of them, they don't care whether you come today or tomorrow, as long as the money is coming. That's all that's what they don't want. And I don't think that's right. I think it's fine to make money on the martial arts. I mean, but I think that there has to be some integrity that goes with it. And you have to be able to interrelate with every one of your pupils. You can't just say, well, this guy's a donkey, I'm not going to pay any attention to him. I mean, hey, he's the one that needs more help. I have a private club in Seattle now, and we don't teach any outsiders that are already professed martial artists, because most of the time when they come in, we're just doing a lot of basic things. I don't even have a name for the club, except that if you want to name it, we'd be teaching the Jun Fan Gung Fu concept, which was what Bruce left me with, and it's more of a fundamental, practicing art than anything else. But we don't charge anything. We just do it for the fun of it, because if we can share with you something that we know in our limited knowledge and help you out a little bit, that's what it's all about. There's nothing more rewarding than to have somebody come to you and tell you what they did for you. I have 2 people in the last 25 years who told me that they were on the verge of committing suicide before they joined our club, and that we made them feel good about themselves and turned them around. You can't buy a reward like that. The money just can't buy anything like that. I have a fellow in my club now that's stone blind. 12 years ago he was in my club, and he disappeared, and I didn't know what happened to him, because as you guys that are martial artists can tell, that there's a big turnover in the martial art field. He disappeared. Last year his mother came to the office and said, "You remember this young man?" And I remembered his face, but I couldn't remember his name. I'm bad at names. When I was married, I couldn't remember my wife's name sometimes. That didn't do me very well either. But anyhow, she told me that he had contracted diabetes, and he became blind. All of his friends deserted him. And then on top of that, he lost both of his kidneys, and he was on his deathbed. And just 2 years prior to last year, he was given a donor kidney. And this last year, the doctor said, looks like your body has received a kidney. I would suggest that you go out and try to get a little exercise, not a lot. So she brought him down. She said, she said, he's got no friends. You think you could take him back? I said, hey, he's part of the family. Bring him back. And this guy's stone blind. If you can't learn something from a person like that, to staying there stone blind, and you're kind of telling him to do something, it's the most rewarding thing that you ever could experience,
Thank you for that question. Thank you for the answer, Taky. Taking you back to a sadder time, can you tell us how you first heard about Bruce's death, and what was your reaction? How did it affect you?
That's an interesting question. Probably 2-3 years prior to his death, periodically somebody would come to me that I knew, and they'd say, well, gee, I'm awfully sorry that I heard that Bruce was killed in a tournament last week. But every time that I heard something like that, it just happened that I talked to Bruce the night before on the phone, and my answer would be, well, gee, he didn't sound very dead to me. I talked to him last night on the phone, And so this was really good, and in our eyes, those of us that knew him, he was Mr. Invincible. He was a guy that we knew nothing could happen to him. But all of a sudden, one morning, I have a couple of supermarkets, and one of my checkers, when I walked into the store about 7 o'clock in the morning, she said, the paper, she said, Bruce Lee is dead. I said, what are you talking about, Teresa? I said, don't give me any more malarkey. I'm hearing this all the time. But she brought the paper back, and there it was. And of course, I knew then that it had to be true. And as I say, I haven't seen Bruce for, real closely for quite lengths of time toward his death, before his death. But it devastated me because, we were so close. And, I used to get letters from at least one a month. I had a stack of letters like this that, 2 months before he died, I said to myself one day when I was cleaning out my room, I said, what am I holding these letters for? And I burned them all. And after I did that, here he's dead. I mean, I had some letters that just told me things that yesterday at our meeting somebody asked me a question, and they said, well, do you think that he got discouraged from his failures? And that's an interesting question. He wrote me these letters, and every time he wrote me a letter, he'd tell me that I'm working on this project with Sterling Phillips, the writer, or William Dozier or something like that, and we're going to be doing this. And the next month, the letter would say, well, that project fell through because the public, he said he didn't think the public could go for it or whatever. But before that letter was finished, he was working on another project with all the positiveness that you could believe anybody could have within himself. So he was a very positive fellow. I don't think that he had any feeling, any question in his mind that he wasn't going to, that he was going to fail. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do. I mean, we need to think more positive about ourselves. You have to learn everything about yourself. You know, I'm out there in my backyard walking at night, and I'm trying to analyze my walking, where my balance is, and all these kind of things. And at the same time, he used to throw this phrase at us, no-mindedness. Well, literally, it sounds like you must just blank your mind and be just nothing, you know. But actually, it just means that your mind must be at rest, just eager to pick up any morsel of noise or anything, whether it's behind you or beside you or in front of you. And this is the kind of thing that you practice. You're walking out there and you're practicing where your balance is, you know, pronation of your feet, all these things. And at the same time, your mind is open. You're listening to the birds up there. You know, I was walking with a friend, and I said, listen to those birds. He said, what birds? I mean, if you don't get into the media that you're in, you know, you're not going to make it. It's like Bruce said, you can't swim on dry land. You've got to be in the water. And if you fight the water, you're going to drown. It's just that simple. You have to identify with where you are.
Thank you, Taky. Does anybody else have any other questions? Yeah, please.
Given that Mark has never seen Dag in the history story, have you had any feedback from Linda? And what are field trail about the film once you see the complete project?
Oh, Linda had told me that she viewed it down in California. You know, they had that placing of the star on the sidewalk there, and then they showed the movie. In fact, I think you were down there at the time. Did you went to the movie, didn't you? Yeah. Andy went to the movie there, and she was very elated. She thought it was pretty good.
Okay. Does anybody else have any questions at all? Speak now. Okay, thanks.
How do you relate Wing Chun to JKB?
Well, you know, Ted Wong did a book with William Chunk, and each instance or technique that they did in Wing Chun, he elaborated how they did it in Jeet Kune Do. And you know, I'm not at that proficient level. If I told you something, it would just be my personal feelings, and somebody else might say, oh, that guy's crazy. So I'd rather not get into that. But let me tell you one of the things. In Wing Chun, some of the basic things like movement from side to side. I guess Ted Wong and one of the other fellows, I think it was Howard Williams, and I don't say this to be critical, I'm just trying to get a point across. They went to a seminar, and let's say that this group was with Ted Wong the first hour, and then the next hour, the first hour Howard Williams had this group, the next hour they changed. And when he was working with one of the groups, Howard Williams told the guys that when you make that lateral movement to your left, he said, put your front foot forward, because he said, in doing so, he said, you're protecting your groin. And that makes sense, doesn't it? But in the higher echelon of mobility and all these things, it makes more sense to move that left foot first, because it just makes sense, you know. But at the same time, having instilled in your mind the principle of keeping this groin protected by moving your right foot first, what it does is it conceals that principle within yourself, so that you know that even in moving like this, that you have to protect it, and it's ingrained in your mind. And that's the difference, but you have to take into consideration at that level mobility, you know. At the beginning level, I maintain that you have to use, you have to just do those. You have to do those techniques over and over, no matter how boring it may seem, because every little thing that you do wrong later on is going to be a death warrant against yourself. And when you get up to a certain plateau, it's not the big things that's going to make a difference. It's going to be just little things like that's going to make the difference of whether doing something or not. And it's almost going to be like a little thing like that that you all of a sudden, it's like a light bulb coming on the dark. A little thing like that makes you say, wow, I got it now. And those of you that are martial artists, I know that you have come across those kind of development within yourself.
Taky, have you ever, did you ever have any notion of being in films yourself?
Oh, that's an interesting, you know, getting back to Bruce, he considered me his closest friend. He told me that about 2 or 3 weeks before he died when he called me from Hong Kong. He chastised me for not answering his letters, and I said, listen, Bruce, I said, you're on your way to, you know, to making all the money and doing the thing that you wanted to do. One of the things that he wanted to use that movie media was he felt very frustrated that the Chinese figure in most of the movies before he got into them over here was that they always saw the Chinese fellow with the braided hair and his hands in his coat sleeves, and all he said was chop chop, and it was a very demeaning role, and he was very concerned about that. He was very frustrated. He told me many times, he said, I want to do something to create an image of my people that we're equals, that we're not down there in the gutter like they're picturing us, you know. And he wanted in the worst way to use the movie media to be able to project himself in some of these roles. And writers like Sterling Sullivan and William Dozier and these people like that, they were behind Bruce when he wanted to play a lead role in maybe a romantic lead role or something like that. But they had to tell him in honesty, you know, Bruce, we know you could do it, but the public is the one that pays our bill, and if they don't accept it, we can't do it. And so he missed a lot of chances of doing something like this that he had every capable means of being able to do.
Would you yourself have ever wanted to be in a film with Bruce?
I got a little bit. See, speaking is not one of my big things. I do it when I feel like I have a purpose to accomplish. Like the reason I'm here is I just want to share with you people that Bruce has contributed so much to us that we need to remember him for what he did, and in a positive manner, not that he was fooling around with some other woman or something like that. You know, that's the kind of stuff that makes a lot of copy, because a couple of people that were, you know, close to Bruce just within the last year or so came out and said they thought he was murdered, and I myself talked to Linda about that. She told me that she didn't feel at all that he was murdered, because she said that he was one of the greatest idols that ever was in Southeast Asian nations, and he did so much for his people. She said, why would they want to kill him? But there's another story floating out there that had to do with a feudal thing going on between Run Shaw and Golden Harbor Studios, and that they had him put away. But Linda doesn't believe that, and I choose not to believe it. I mean, Linda feels very strongly that it was just an accident, you know. And I like to think of it as a hydroplane motor that's so finely tuned that, you know, they could go out in the lake or the sound any day and the motor could just sputter. And it does happen that way because they're so finely tuned that any little thing could happen to them. But getting back to the question of the movies, as I said, Bruce felt that he owed me something, and he wanted me to be in that game of death. And I just dreaded that when he called me and asked to be in it, because I know what I can do and what I don't feel well at. And I said, listen, Bruce, I said, you must have thousands of people in Hong Kong that can do the job much better than me. I said, why are you asking me? And he said, listen, he said, I'm the technical director and the co-producer. He said, don't worry. He said, I want you in this movie. And so very reluctantly I said, well, I guess I have to do it. But it happened that when they first started filming it, they'd already finished with Jabbar and Danny Nasanto, and I was supposed to be the next guy. I was supposed to be the praying mantis master next to the top floor where Hugh O'Brien was, that he went through these floors after Hugh O'Brien. But I had an import-export business at the time, and it was a seasonal thing, and it was just coming in about October. And I called over and told Linda, I said, gee, Linda, I said, I can't make it because I'm right in the middle of my import business. And well, she said, don't worry about it, because she said, Bruce was called to Warner Brothers in California to look at the possibility of another movie that they were going to make. This was Enter the Dragon. And she said if they can get together, she said they'll start shooting right away, and in that case, she said we'll just shelve it for another year or so, or however long it takes to make that movie. And so just before he died, he called me again and said he wanted me in that movie. And again, I tried to get out of it, but I couldn't do it. And so if he'd have lived another month or so, I would have probably been in there and done the part. And then it would have been really a tragedy to see the movie. But, you know, it's just a pleasure to be here to talk to you people. I hope that I've been able to answer some of your questions and give you some input. I felt very inadequate coming here just to talk to you people. It's not the kind of thing that I know that you're interested in, but it was a story that I felt that I needed to pass on to you in terms of what Bruce did for one guy that was just at the brink of suicide, you know.